Hello, and welcome to episode 9 of Ads from the Week, where I share 5 or so vintage newspaper ads that I clip from either the San Francisco Examiner or the Oakland Tribune, which were concurrent with the past work week of Monday, August 10th, through to Friday, August 14th of 2026. So let's start our journey, shall we? We'll begin on August 10th, 1986, which was a Sunday, and the Oakland Tribune wants you to know that Manhunter will start Friday, August 15th at select theaters near you. Thief had made me something of a Michael Mann fan, although the artistic and narrative choices he had made adapting F. Paul Wilson's novel The Keep both baffled and frustrated me. Uh, the same applies here for this adaptation of the best-selling thriller Red Dragon by Thomas Harris, which was the source material for Manhunter. Uh, while they are, while there are definitely things that I liked and admired about the film, I thought it did fall short of capturing the darker and more harrowing aspects of its source material. Um, In 1986, when I first watched the film on home video, I thought it seemed to be a failure on Mann's part. But nowadays, however, I think it really has more to do with how certain aspects of the story or the novel that resonated with me just really could not be translated from the page to the screen in a way that would have them retain the power they had, um, that I had experienced them as a reader. Um, yeah, it was just a lesson that I had to learn over time that the perceptual intimacy that you get when you read a story just doesn't translate to uh, to film because you are getting the visual representation of the perceptual intimacy that occurred with whomever was or whoever adapted the work. And, which is how you get the novel The Shining and Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, or the subject of so much almost comical discourse online, you know, The Odyssey, and Christopher Nolan's interpretation or version of the Odyssey. Same thing. Um, I've never seen the film Red Dragon, which I think had Anthony Hopkins brought back to play Hannibal Lecter and the kind of like the as a prequel to The Silence of the Lambs, although The Silence of the Lambs technically is a sequel to Red Dragon or another book that featured Hannibal Lecter. And um, Rafe Fiennes played Francis Dolarhyde in the film, I think. But I saw this and I've seen this version, and that's enough. Um, you know, I like the books, but come to think of it, I haven't even seen Hannibal, and with Hannibal, I use the same reasoning that for why I haven't seen Doctor Sleep. It's like, yeah, I read the book. Yeah, I'm good. So we're going to move forward 10 years to August 11th, 1996, and The Fan starts Friday. Now, this was not a remake of the 1981 Lauren Bacall starring pseudo slasher thriller that had been adapted from the epistolary novel by Bob Randall, but it's an all new story, one that was adapted from an entirely different novel written by Peter Abrams. that just so happened to have the same title. So it goes. Robert De Niro stars as Gil Renard, I think it's it, a baseball obsessed loser with anger management issues and an increasingly oh so tenuous grasp on reality. While a pre-Blade Wesley Snipes is tasked with playing Bobby Rayburn, the baseball newcomer to the San Francisco Giants and the embodiment and thus becoming the brutal focus of Renard's obsessions and frustrations. Uh, Turns out that Rayburn just so happens to hit a slump in his playing just as Renard's life starts to spiral out of whatever semblance of control it had remaining. Psychosis-infused shenanigans ensue. The one thing about this movie that really proved memorable for me had really nothing to do with the movie. Well, technically, yes and no. It's the scene that occurs when De Niro's character takes his son to Candlestick for a game because Candlestick Park was still standing at this point. And he leaves his son at the game to make a quick trip over to Oakland, where he has a disastrous sales meeting about, the for he's a knife salesman for his former father's company or his father's former company, but he's no longer in charge. He's kind of like again, he's his life is spiraling. So he leaves. He is his character's under a lot of stress and pressure and everything, and he leaves, Candlestick and rushes out to Oakland, leaving his son behind at the game. And there's a shot of him driving over to Oakland on the lower deck of the Bay Bridge. So his car is sandwiched between the two levels of the Bay Bridge. And that's like, okay, that's a great shot. And it gets across that. He has his meeting, and then he drives back to San Francisco. And we just get the same shot or an alternate shot, where they just reverse the image. So it looks like he's driving back and he's again on the lower deck of the Bay Bridge. And which is physically impossible because the upper deck of the Bay Bridge goes into San Francisco, the lower deck goes into Oakland. So for people who live in San Francisco or in the Bay Area, they're just like, yeah, that's it's kind of like the shot of I think it was from The Graduate where Dustin Hoffman's driving across the upper deck of the Bay Bridge into Berkeley, and yeah, you drive into San Francisco, you would be on the lower deck, but it's one of those it's just one of those oddities. But from a filmmaking and visual storytelling standard, I can see that compression just gets a nice visual representation of the stress that his character is under and everything. But that and a bit with a tattoo are the things that I most clearly remember. Oh, and the fact that a comically heavy rainstorm uh, happens, and yeah, they don't play baseball in the rain. They'll play football in the rain, but they won't play baseball in the rain. And I remember one critic saying that Tony Scott should have been sent to director jail for making a movie where they played baseball in the rain. Okay, we're gonna go back. Oh, it looks like 13 years? No. Yeah. Wait, no. Is that 20? No, that can't be. Yeah, maybe it is 13 years. Uh, to August. No, it can't be. I'm getting it backwards. We're going back to August 12th, 1979. So let me see. That's 17 years. Was doing the math in reverse. So 17 years to August 12th, 1979. And first up, we have uh, the Oakland Tribune's East Bay at Ease supplement, which has a cover for of Edward Gorey art for Dracula. that because they have an article called "The Blood Counts Roll On" or something of that nature, um, that devotes some attention to the supposed Dracula mystique. Now, staff writer Robert Taylor uh, writes a very short and sweet examination of the glut of Dracula productions that were unleashed during the summer of 1979. He even reaches back to point out that there had been a musical version of Dracula performed at the Berkeley Rep Theater in 1975, as well as a production of an original play of Dracula that had starred Michael Ansara as the Count and Werner Klemperer, who would many know as Colonel Clank. I'm assuming he played Van Helsing. That had been performed at the Palace of Fine Arts in 1978. Uh, excuse me, taking the most focus in this article is a local production of a new play or a play called The Passion of Dracula, which had been written by Bob Hall and David Richmond. And this article kind of serves as something of a soft marketing push for that production, which was about to open. And The Passion of Dracula was coming off of a successful small scale run in New York's Greenwich Village that and had done quite well in the shadow of Edward Gorey's smash hit revival of the classic, uh, you know, John L. Balderston revision of the Hamilton Dean play, which had made Frank Langella a star on Broadway. They ran pretty much concurrently, but they both uh, and got attention. Taylor does quote, but he does not name uh, one, I'm assuming, East Coast critics' comparison of the two concurrent productions. And that quote reads, "One is played for laughs, the other is played for keeps. One is obvious, the other intelligent. One looks like an Edward Gorey cartoon, the other like an old English thriller." I guess you can tell which one they preferred. Um, Jeremy Brett, who many would know for playing Sherlock Holmes, he played Dracula in the West Coast tour venues of the Edward Gorey production, which I think was going to opened in the fall or winter of '79 in San Francisco. But he gets quoted in the article talking about how something that occurred at the very end of Act One of the Edward Gorey production is what convinced him to do it. Um, and Langella also gets quoted where they're talking about what they think of, why, their approach to the character. Langella called him evil, but very, very lonely, and there's also mentioned, of course, is the slapstick rom-com Love at First Bite, which starred George Hamilton as Dracula, as as well as a mention of the big budget Dracula movie that Universal produced, which just so happened to star Frank Langella because everybody had seen him as Dracula on Broadway. They're like, oh, we got to put him in a movie. And also Werner Herzog's remake of Nosferatu. Nosferatu is also mentioned, but not just only in passing. Um, the question of what makes Dracula so alluring and popular to audiences is asked, of course. Somebody mentioned that it might be the aura and mystery of human blood. Oh. Um, the soulful yearning for immortality, probably. Or perhaps the aching loneliness that has over time settled over the perception of the tuxedo and cape clad vampire. Although the article does end with an answer that kind of like favors that last one and serves as a sales hook for The Passion of Dracula, pointing out that the play's authors strive to, quote, create a woman that Dracula would spend 400 years searching for, unquote. Which I think also hits at the prime hints, I should say, at the primal allure of Dracula stories. They acknowledge the oh so human nature of just having a perpetual aching, yearning, or thirsting desire that can never ever truly be satiated, no matter how much or how hard one tries. I mean, you can temporarily quench, but that that ache will always return in another form because that's just part of being human. Now, across the bay in the San Francisco Examiner Chronicle Sunday Date book, I found an ad for the hardcover release of William Goldman's new novel, Tinsel. And once upon a time, I had had a dream of becoming a full-time professional writer. And if I was ever to discuss why I did that, I would have cited William Goldman as my inspiration for doing so, because I have a very clear memory of sitting in the back seat of my family's Ford Pinto station wagon, which had panels and was yellow. And I mentioned that because I've always talked about telling Tanya that I wanted to get a yellow car, and she's adamant. I don't want a car the color of baby poop or infant poop. And so that's a non-starter for us. And I think it's just probably because as a kid, we had a yellow Pinto station wagon with panels. I'm going to always mention it was a very 70s car. But I was sitting back there and looking, and I looked at the also buy page of Goldman because this and with the hardback of Magic because Magic was the book that introduced me to Goldman. But I discovered he had also written the novel Marathon Man and the script, and he'd written all kinds of uh, movies and books and nonfiction and everything. And I was like, wow, you can write all kinds of stuff and make a living doing it. Wow. Back to Tinsel. This was written just before his infamous book, Adventures in the Screenwriting Trade. Uh, and I think there was elements and touches of the industry in here that he couldn't put in a work of nonfiction. Uh, and Goldman does lob some entertaining and at times really harrowing brickbats at the Hollywood industry in the book. And I do remember reading it. I probably read it in the 90s, and it was a feisty and entertaining book. But I find most of Goldman's books feisty and entertaining, and also quite dark. That was the biggest shock with The Princess Bride, was like, if you see the movie and then you read the book, oof, they're two very, very different things. The book is much darker, much more jaded than the very sweet movie. So if you love the movie, just be prepared that it's kind of like I think what people kind of like compare the musical or the film Wicked to the source material, which is very different. They made some substantive changes. So, but that was Tinsel by William Goldman. Recommended book, by the way. Now we are going to step forward 2 years only to August 13th, 1981. And we have an ad here for a sneak preview of An American Werewolf in London, which is going to be screened on the eve of the full moon, appropriately enough. Um, and I hope that anybody and everybody that went and saw these sneak previews had as much fun as I did when I watched the film during its regular engagement, general release. I saw it at the Century Dome Theater in Hayward, just off the Nimitz Freeway. Um, my only real complaint about the film at the time was that the werewolf was never shown with all that much lingering clarity. It was just flashes and glimpses, and I really wanted to get a look at the thing. But no soap. But the best moment uh, for me was when the gigantic beast, and it is indeed gigantic, uh, approaches the escalator, which I think is the first time it's actually shown in the film, because there's a transformation scene, and then he goes on his first night killing spree. And there's the couple that goes around the back of the house, and I think that is after the subway scene, because this was the first time you saw it. And I do remember, because you see it's shown mostly through point of view shots, where it's like you see from the wolf perspective, and the guy runs and he runs onto the escalator and he falls and then he rolls over, and then there's a shot of from the top of the escalator down, and so you can see the floor of the subway or station, and he's on the escalator coming up, and from the very back of the frame, the werewolf comes walking in, and the thing is, it's huge from, you're like, and I remember, watching that, and my 14-year-old jaw just dropped on the floor when that happened, and I broke out in goose flesh because I was like, "Oh my God!" And there's the reverse angle shot point of view of it approaching the guy. And the thing I really remember was that it was quiet. There was no growling sounds put in, no nothing. It was silent. I think the only sound was the sound of the escalator, and which actually worked really well to kind of like, it just made it somewhat more nightmarish. But yeah, and I will move on from that to our final stop, which is 4 years prior to this, on August 14th, 1960. Although I didn't change the date on the notes, I have 1977, and this is actually 14. It's just like, yeah, 11 years back, but it's actually August 14th, 1960, and Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho starts Wednesday. Now, when I was a much younger and far more naive and willing to believe marketing ballyhoo and hype, I did wonder how film venues managed to enforce the no admittance after the picture starts requirement. And truth be told is that they did not. There's no way you can really do that. It was all just a way to let people know that if you really wanted the full impact of the movie, you had to watch it from the beginning because of the nature of how the story was constructed. If you walked in the middle, you're not going to understand anything, and most people didn't. But and I'm sure that the earliest shows, opening day or special early screening showings, may have made a bit of a show of enforcing this supposed requirement. But it was all just marketing hype. And then it shows Hitchcock was not all that different from William Castle or any other exploitation film huckster in that respect. I mean, yeah, he did what he needed to do to sell a movie, and he sold this one very, very well. I think it was his biggest hit. Um, one one casual and no doubt debatable observation on my part would be that Psycho probably qualifies as Hitchcock's last indisputable significant film, as well as arguably his most famous work. Um, and it was a massive hit. Um, so while Hitchcock's post-Psycho filmography was somewhat uneven and did offer up such entertaining and memorable and beloved highlights as, both The Birds and Frenzy. Um, those films, while successful commercially and critically, their success was just a faint echo of the wallop that had been made by Psycho when it came out. I mean, yeah, it was just kind of like the movie was huge, and it was just, and it's iconic on a level that few films ever really achieve. So, um, and if you haven't seen it, I would recommend seeing it. If you watch one Hitchcock movie, Psycho would be a pretty good choice. I think, there's other films that he's done. Most of them, from like the 50s, I think would be the ones that I would probably, North by Northwest, Vertigo, Rear Window, stuff like that. Um, you know, but I think Psycho is probably, especially his latter day career. Yeah, but that's the big one. That was his Citizen Kane, his Mona Lisa, whatever. Um, and so we have reached the end of the week. Thank you for taking this brief journey with me down memory lane through the weeds as I stumble through my notes and ad lib observations. And I hope to see you next week when we take another journey down memory lane. And until that time, or until next time, let's all try have some fun, okay? Bye. Enough is never enough.